Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the Motorola Moto G Power 5G. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it as I make them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, before we get too far into the phone itself, let's take a look at the box and what comes inside it. So this is pretty basic. It has the typical eco-friendly Motorola design. I definitely like this material, it's pretty cool. Inside here, we don't have a whole lot going on. Got a SIM card removal tool, quick start guide, or whatever this is. Then in here, we got a charging cable and a wall adapter, and as you can see by this big 10 on it, this is a 10-watt wall adapter. But moving on to the phone itself, with the Motorola Moto G Power 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 405, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So definitely a real nice display. I honestly have no complaints here. The only thing is, I guess it could have been like an AMOLED or something like that. But in this price range, this phone goes for I think $199, and I can't remember the last brand new phone I've gotten that is around that price and does have an AMOLED display, so not really a very realistic thing to expect. But aside from that, really everything is great here. At 6.5 inches, it's not the largest display out there. If you remember the Moto G Stylus 2022 5G, that phone was like 6.8 inches, so quite a bit larger than this. But at the same time, I feel like it is decently large, at least enough to give you a nice experience. I mean, I personally use my iPhone 13 that's 6.1 inches to watch videos all the time, and I have a perfectly fine experience. I've even done plenty of mobile gaming and stuff like that on it, so in general, if I can get by with a 6.1 inch display, for most people, a 6.5 inch display will be perfectly fine. In addition to the size, we're also getting real good image quality here. With the 1080p resolution, things are going to be nice and crisp. So if you're doing stuff like watching videos, for example, or maybe looking at photos using social media, playing games, stuff where the image quality really matters, you will get a good experience with this phone. And then with the 120Hz refresh rate, the movement on the screen is going to be a bit faster and smoother, making the phone feel a bit more premium in general. So yeah, if you're looking for a more affordable 5G phone that has a really nice display, then I do think the Moto G Power 5G will be a great choice. Now for storage, the Moto G Power 5G is getting 256GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, but keep in mind, I do want to point out, this phone in my hand is the factory unlocked version you get straight from Motorola. So in the future, when this phone inevitably reaches US carriers, if you get it through like Cricket or something, I doubt it's going to have 256GB. When it comes to carrier phones, they really never do. If I had to guess, it's probably going to end up having maybe 128 or worst case scenario 64. I remember last year the Moto G 5G that came out around this time, factory unlocked, that phone had 256, but I believe Cricket's version only has 64, which is insane to me, but unfortunately that's really just how it works. So if you do plan on getting this phone unlocked, keep in mind it will have 256, which is a ton of storage for a more affordable phone like this. But if you do get it through a carrier, you might not get as much. Now for security features, the Moto G Power 5G does have face unlock, so definitely nice there. And we're also getting a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. Now for the camera setup here, with the Moto G Power 5G, up front, we got a real nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So unfortunately, there's no ultra wide camera here, which is really too bad because I feel like even though this is a pretty affordable phone, at this point in 2023, the ultra wide camera is such a popular feature that it's more or less an expectation now. I mean, sure, there are phones that don't have it, like the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, for example, which I think is actually the exact same price as this, so I guess it's not that weird, but it's just really too bad because if you want a phone that has a really nice camera setup, this phone has almost everything you need except that, so definitely something to keep in mind. But maybe you don't really care about the ultra-wide camera. In that case, this is really not a big deal because aside from this, I feel like the camera setup here is definitely good. Now, seeing as this is a first impressions video, obviously I haven't used the camera yet, but with a 50 megapixel camera, I mean, I've never used a 50 megapixel camera on a smartphone and had it been terrible. Sure, it might not end up being the best, but knowing Motorola, I am expecting it to be at least decent. And then for video, keep in mind, with this phone, we are getting a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K here, which to most people is probably not a surprise. But if you're coming from maybe an older flagship phone, for example, they can record in 4K, and you're expecting every phone at this point to be able to do it, just keep in mind, while 4K video recording isn't exactly a feature only higher end devices have, in this more entry-level budget kind of price range, it's definitely not something you're commonly going to find. Now when it comes to the RAM and processor, with the Moto G Power 5G, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 930 processor. So So in general, the performance here is actually really good. Sure, on one hand, I haven't really used this phone a ton yet, but in my experience so far, things do run really well, and really no matter what you're doing on this phone, sure, it's not going to be as fast as a much higher end device, but at the same time, for things people typically use smartphones for, like web browsing, social media, watching videos, whether you're watching YouTube or streaming on whatever platform you use, and even some decent mobile gaming, regardless, you will get a pretty good experience here. But that being said, if you are more of a power user, if you're really going to be on your phone all day doing more demanding activities like high performance mobile gaming, then yeah, you might want to spend a bit more and get something higher end. But again, for the average user, the performance with this phone will be plenty good enough. Now, I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. Now, what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone, and then comparing your results to these, and that'll give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise compared to your current device. Because depending on what you have, it may or may not actually be a performance upgrade. If you're coming from maybe an older flagship phone, for example, then yeah, chances are this phone is probably going to be at least a bit of a downgrade. But on the other hand, if you're coming from more of a mid-range phone, then this phone could be a really good upgrade. But again, in my experience, while I haven't been using this phone a ton yet, I have noticed the performance is definitely pretty good. Overall, things do run pretty smoothly, and for what it is, I really have no complaints. Now for the battery, with the Moto G Power 5G, we are getting a 5000 mAh battery, so really large. You can expect to get great battery life and longevity here, and it also supports 15-watt fast charging, which granted isn't really the best fast charging, but at the same time, it definitely does get the job done. So in general, if you are looking for a more affordable 5G phone and the battery is more of an important thing to you, then while I want to say most 5G phones in general, at least in this price range, are going to have pretty much the same battery size. Just keep in mind, with the Moto G Power 5G, the battery life is going to be just as good, if not a little better than average. Now for the software, this phone does have Android 13, so definitely great there. But unfortunately, when it comes to other features, we're not getting NFC here. So if you like to use tap and pay, you are going to want to get something else. Now, I feel like this is really unexplainable at this point, because I want to say pretty much every other 5G phone besides Motorola phones, for whatever reason, at least the newer ones, are all gonna have NFC. So I just really don't know why Motorola is constantly leaving that feature out. It just really makes no sense to me. I mean, most competitors do have it. I've even seen a blue phone that has NFC, which in my experience, blue phones typically have significantly fewer features than most phones in their price range. So yeah, definitely a big disappointment that this phone doesn't have NFC. Now, on one hand, you might not ever use tap and pay, so if that's you, you can pretty much ignore this because it's obviously not going to matter. But in general, I feel like a lot of people now at least want the option to eventually use it, because after all, contactless mobile payment services are becoming so much more popular and widely used. The vast majority of stores we go into these days are at least going to have some sort of tap and pay, in the US at least. So yeah, in general, definitely keep in mind, again, this phone does not have NFC, so you're not going to be able to use tap and pay here. But of course, if you never use that feature, then it's still not going to be a big deal. But in conclusion, my overall first impressions of the Motorola Moto G Power 5G. In general, I feel like I really have very few complaints about this phone. The only real glaring drawbacks I'm seeing so far are, first of all, again, this phone doesn't have an ultra-wide camera. I feel like for what it is, it probably should. And again, with the NFC thing, I feel like at this point, there's just really no reason for a phone like this to not have NFC. But aside from that, this phone has a great display, plenty of storage, a 50 megapixel camera that I'm assuming takes some really good photos, a large battery that has decent fast charging, the latest version of Android, and it also has really good performance with 5G connectivity, all for around $199, so definitely really affordable for what we're getting here. So overall, despite a few more or less kind of minor drawbacks, I do think the Moto G Power 5G is definitely a great device that is really worth considering if you're looking for a more affordable 5G phone. Now once again, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipus Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.